Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Lagoon. So glad you're here with me today so we can discuss the new Hellboy film, which is the fourth live action film in the Hellboy movie franchise. This one, based off of the graphic novel with its same name, Hellboy the Crooked Man. Now, as a avid comic book collector, I have always been into Hellboy. I got into him when I was really young, and then that first Guillermo del Toro film came out. And ever since then, I've just kind of really enjoyed collecting his comics and all of the other kind of expanded universe comics with it, like Lobster Johnson, Abe Sapien, and the BPRD. Now, outside of all the cool, nerdy comic book talk, we're going to really just kind of discuss and break down the new film. Unfortunately, the last film that came out, I didn't think was too good. In fact, I never finished watching it. And I guess I'll do a review of that in the future. But for now, I wanted to discuss this film because it was actually quite enjoyable and quite good. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with it in some regards, and we're going to discuss that momentarily. But as usual, I just want to kind of give a non-little spoiler talk. If you like superhero films or occult films or supernatural horror films, especially about witchcraft and Satan and stuff like that, then you'll really like this film. I have read the graphic novel, and for the most part, I can tell you it is very accurate to the comic book. There are some slight deviations, of course, when you translate a comic to film. But for the most part, the narrative is intact, and there's even some cool little supplemental material that's in the comic that's also in this film, which I thought was really cool to see. So this, let me see here. Let me pull it up. One sec. So yeah, this came out last year, and is it's a decently well-made film, to be honest with you. Jack Keshy is the one who plays Hellboy, and this film takes place in 1959. And so it's kind of, it would take place before the Del Toro film, but it's, kind of like in its own separate canon. But you could still, I watch it and be like, yeah, this could still be the same Hellboy, I guess. But this is a great comic book. It's one of the best graphic novels that you could buy. Like if somebody was trying to get into Hellboy and they asked me, Gill-boy, what comic should I read? Well, obviously I'm going to recommend, Hellboy Seeds of Destruction. And obviously I would give the one shot of the painting of Moloch. And then I would give you the Crooked Man. And then after you read those, if you're not into it, then Hellboy's not for you. If you do like it, then I'd offer you some more. But Jack Keshy plays a really good Hellboy. Ron Perlman is, obviously he is Hellboy. He is the untouchable Hellboy. And I really hope in the future we will get that third final Hellboy film. But who knows? We probably won't because unfortunately, I think this movie cost $20 million to make and it only made $2 million back. So it's a failure. But I don't think the movie is bad, which is unfortunate because it's a good film. It is a lot better than that last film, and I'm fearful to say that other film might have killed the franchise. But this one is really good, so you should give it a shot. To summarize my non-spoiler review, I'll just go ahead and say I'd give this film a low 7 out of 10. Maybe a 6 out of 10, but its attention and respect for, and I know Hellboy might get mad at me and saying this, the lore of the universe, I give it a little extra point. I would originally give it a 6 out of 10, but because it had such love for the comics and the source material, especially when we live in a time where these creators go out of their way to insult the fans and the nerds, I just give it that extra point. And I know a lot of critics give it 2 out of 5, stuff like that. But I would say it's about a low 7 out of 10, if I'm going to be fair. And as I said, Jack Keshy plays Hellboy. Phenomenal job. I would love to see you play Hellboy again, maybe in another 60s version. The little reference to the 60s are for me from the strange tales from the comics that take place, I believe, in the 50s and 60s. Hope you guys adapt some of those. Now, Bobby Jo Song is also in this, and that's played by Adeline Rudolph, and she does a phenomenal performance as Jo. Kind of like messing around with witchcraft, really trying to see the supernatural. Just charming performance, a beautiful innocence to her portrayal of the character. And that's the thing I was going to say. The acting in this film, for what it is really good, actually. It's engaging. And we also have... sorry, it's hard for me to see in this mess. We have Cora Fisher, who is played by Hannah Margetson. And then Tom Farrell is played by Jefferson White. And Effie Cobb is played by Leah McNamara. Now, Leah gives a really awesome performance as this southern witch. And she's Irish, too. So her southern accent is on point, right? It's just like, if I had to compare this to something, it's kind of like Pumpkinhead. It's like this southern south witch story that's involved the Crooked Man, which is basically the devil himself. And the Crooked Man is played by Martin Bassendell. And he gives a really cool, creepy performance as the Crooked Man. And then my personal favorite, the one who I believe steals the show, which is Reverend Watts, which is played by Joseph Marcel. Now, Mr. Marcel, you are on fire with the Holy Spirit in this movie, as you hilariously say in the film. One thing that I was really excited about is that they didn't shy away from the Christianity in this film. When you're dealing with Satan, you got to have God, right? So it's cool that they show God kind of helping out Hellboy and all these other, the priest and the reverend. So it's a really fun time. If I could say anything about this film, without getting into the spoilers, is I had a great time watching this film. It was just fun, It reminded me of whenever I picked up the Hellboy comics, started getting into it. It's just a over the top, good time. Now, to start getting into the spoilers of the film. So if you don't want to be spoiled, click off this video, pause it, go watch it, come back, come hang out, get you a new drink, and sit down and let's discuss it. Maybe you didn't like it. If you didn't, let's tell me down below in the comments why you didn't like it. If you did like it, tell me why you did like it. It could not be for you, but I think you'll enjoy it. If you like movies about witches and the kind of scary demonic stuff, I'm telling you, you're gonna like it. Don't sleep on this film like everybody else did. Now, thing that I loved most, as soon as it starts, you get the Hellboy the Crooked Man title card. And it looks just like a Hammer horror title card, which I, as a huge Hammer nerd, as you know, we've all been doing Hammer reviews and streaming on Spooky Fam. I just loved it. And it gives you like a variety of the title card. Like it says Hellboy the Crooked Man, gives you like an iconic Hammer one. Then it cuts like 3 or 4 times to give you different title cards of it. And it's just so cool. It's like, it just feels like, a 50s or 60s, 70s Hammer film. And I just was immediately excited, right? Now, it starts with them on the train, and they're transporting this demonic entity that's an arachnid. So automatically, as someone who doesn't really care for the creepy crawlies like that, I was like, great. Yes, I remember this from the comics. I'm so glad that they kept this, right? And they're just talking about how, like, this is like a demonic spider. It's whatever. It's creepy. And Hellboy's talking about how he hears something calling, like, dark things call to dark things. The spider breaks out, surprise, right? And, oh, my God, we get an Xbox 360 PS3 spider crawling at you, right? So right there, I was like, oh. But the acting is cool. So either what's going to happen right here, it's kind of like an Alien Romulus. You're either going to be like, okay, this is dumb, sci-fi level, or you're going to be like, hey, it's a movie. Let's just have a good time. Let's see where it goes. I hope you do the latter because it's a really good film. But yeah, the graphics are bad. I'm just going to say. So, it's a little rough. I don't want to say it's like Sci-Fi Channel After Dark. But it's close to that, graphic-wise. But the acting and the story is good, so you can kind of look past it. And in a way, it's got kind of a charm to have kind of bad graphics, because it feels like an old-school film. Like, I love the movie Dagon. And that's got PS2 graphics, man. You see Dagon coming out at the end, it's PS2, the tentacles coming out of the girl's mouth. That's maybe PlayStation 1 level graphics. It's got that kind of B-movie charm. And this is a B movie, so I don't know why, you would expect photorealism. I wish that it would have the budget to have photorealism. That would be so awesome. I think Hellboy is a good enough franchise and story to deserve that. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So, the spider gets out, kills one of the BPR agents. Joe and Hellboy go and escape it. Hellboy fights the spider. It's really cool. You see it start shrinking and stuff, and lo and behold, it escapes and goes inside the tunnels. And then they're stranded because they, the train that they're on is like destroyed and they fall out of it. So they're like, well, we lost the cargo, so let's go into town and try to call people. And of course, they are out in the backwoods and the boonies of the South, and there's kind of like out in the Wolfman, there's nothing around. And they come across this village and they find somebody who's basically under the influence of witchcraft, like some kind of spell. And Hellboy finds a witch ball. And they go into the, explanation of what a witch ball is. And one thing I liked about how Hellboy is portrayed in this, and so in the comics, if you've ever read the comics, he's constantly smoking in the comics. He's constantly smoking cigars, cigarettes, what have you. He's a smoker. And so it was cool seeing him just light up all the time in the film. I just really loved that because I feel like that was kind of lacking in the other Hellboy films. I know he smoked in those films, but not to the extent in this one and how he does in the comics. So it was cool to see that. Like, it felt like this was like actually like, the comic book come to life. And I really like that. So anyways, they meet all the characters and lo and behold, this guy comes in and he's just come back from overseas from the war. And they're like, oh, you're back or whatever, your dad and all this stuff. And it turns out, to make a very long story short here, this young man, when he was younger, tried to get involved with witchcraft and do a deal with the devil. And recognizes that this is the old witch doing the spell, and they bring Hellboy the witch's ball, and they go into that, and he's like, well, I'm going to go talk to Cobbs or whatever, and this other witch, and then Hellboy and them kind of go along, and Joe's like, well, I want to see if this is all real or not, and Hellboy's like, you don't want to mess with all that, and she's like, yeah, but I need to know, and besides, are you so eager to go back to the BPRD and tell them we lost the cargo and we failed our mission? So Hellboy's like, bet you're right, let's go and see what we can do to help these people. And so they go off and they come into this cabin and they go upstairs to meet the girl, and her skin, it's just like in the comic book, her skin's all on the bed, it's gnarly, it's like her flesh has been ripped off, and she's, in her animal form, which is cool because, in witchcraft, witches can turn into rabbits, raccoons, all that kind of stuff. And so it's just cool to see like the folklore-y, authentic kind of witchy stuff in this film. So then they go downstairs, and the dude starts telling Hellboy about his past or whatever. And there's this funny little tidbit where Joe's talking about the lore of the witches, right? Because she's obviously a nerd, reading all these forbidden texts and tomes and learning about witchcraft, and maybe not necessarily to practice per se, but you could tell she's kind of interested in practicing witchcraft, right? But she's talking about, she mentions something like, well, in the lore, witches do. And there's this funny moment where Hellboy's, taking a hit off his cigar, and it's like, the lore. oh, no, I've heard everything now. And it's just so funny because you could tell Hellboy, it's just a funny moment in the film. And he's like, I wish I didn't know the lore kind of thing. And it goes into Hellboy's mother, which is cool to finally see in the film. And how she was a witch and, rode the black goat and all that kind of stuff. So they start talking about all that, right? And then the boy starts telling him about the Crooked Man, who was this dude during the Civil War who played both sides. He used his money to fund the Union, and he used his money to find the Confederacy, and kind of served in both sides. And he was like this witch who worshipped Satan. And then he, killed himself, died, and, hung himself. So now he's the Crooked Man. And so he gets his money back for each soul he brings to Lucifer. He gets a penny or whatever. So in this area, if you become a witch and you're trying to do it, they show him like getting the black cat and boiling it and doing all that and getting the lucky bone. And then the Crooked Man comes and the little kid sees it and he's like, screw this, man. And he books off like, anybody would, I think, unless you're just totally into that kind of stuff. And he runs away, and then the bone keeps following him, and he shows him like in the war or whatever, and how the lucky bone's always there, keeping him alive. And they have this bit later on talking about, how he's bound to to the devil, basically, to the demon. He made like a pact or whatever. And at this time, when they're kind of setting up the Crooked Man and all that creepiness, the witch upstairs comes back in her raccoon form. And I would say the graphics for this are about Xbox 360, maybe a little closer to Xbox One. So they have the raccoon, she goes in, and then it goes into like practical, which is cool. All the practical stuff in this film is awesome. You guys know I'm a simp for practical effects, but the practical effect in this is gnarly, man. It's like the raccoon goes into the mouth, and then you see the tail. It's gross. You can kind of see this part in the trailer. And it goes in, and she comes to life, and it's like you could tell she's coming back into her body. It's a really gruesome, body horror-esque shot. And it is so gnarly, man. It's awesome, dude. I just geeked out watching it. It is so uncomfortable to watch. And then, turns out, oh, the witch is after me. She comes back, and, he's like, oh, it's all right, darling. It's okay, baby girl. I say, hell yeah. They got the real talking accent, some bitch, It's the South, man. Shit, the witch and Satan coming for it. The Crooked Man. And then the witch comes out and riding on this white horse, and she's like kind of naked and stuff. And she's real creepy. And man, she plays a nasty, sexy, kind of evil witch, man. It's so perfect. And she's basically talking about, oh, you come back, you come back in here, and the Crooked Man gonna come get you. He ain't afraid of you. And, Hellboy comes out and he's like, what up? Screw you. I'm freaking Hellboy. And she's like, he ain't afraid of you, Hellboy. And then she, like, levitates off the horse and, like, flies up, kind of like in Robert Eggers' The Witch or whatever. And she, like, flies out and Joe's like, this can't be real. Meanwhile, this little insect thing that they talked about earlier about how it's like a witch's familiar and it can only hurt the witch. Hurts what's her name? She dies. Then the horse turns into the dude's father because she did a witchcraft spell on him and basically, been torturing him, stuff like that. And he's like, okay, well, he dies. And he's like, I'm sorry, Father, I left. I shouldn't have messed with any of this devil stuff. So he's like, well, it's time to go to church. Which I was like, yeah, I would say so. If you're dealing with some hardcore witchcraft, I think it's time to get your ass to church. You know what I'm saying? So they take him and they're like, well, we got to bury him in consecrated ground. And so they go and we meet the Reverend, man. And like I said before, he just steals the show. They make him look like he's kind of more Protestant, but he's got like the Catholic get up. So whatever, either way, he's blind, right? And he's blind and you can tell he's like really close to the Lord, And he's got that like African-American Southern preacher, the Lord said, so he's like over the top. It's so awesome. It just bodes well with the rest of the stuff that's about to happen. So they get to this hill, to this church, and it's near the Crooked Man's house, right? And Hellboy's following him there, and they go inside the church, and the Reverend's talking about how somebody said that they were going to come, and it's alluding to the witch that just died. Ghost went into the church, or whatever. And they have this really cool, beautiful part about how it's like, well, her body was evil, but her soul was pure. Alluding to, like, God's forgiveness and mercy, and he, taking her to heaven and stuff. So that was kind of cool, It's like, oh, this is kind of a cool movie. They're acknowledging the good. Because, most witchcraft movies is just the devil, and they kind of, like, put, the good forces over here. You know what I'm saying? But in this, it's like they're both there, which is fun. It's like, it makes it more fun. And so they're doing that and talking, and then they get to the part, like I said earlier, where it's talking about how he's soul bound. He did a pact with Satan, so he's bound to it. And they have this thing where it's like, well, he was just a kid. It can't be binding. And Hellboy's like, it's binding or whatever, And the guy's like, well, I'll just go and finish my deal with the devil and stop all of this and whatever. And Hellboy's like, well, no, that's why I'm here. We're going to negotiate, right? And so when they get to that part, I skipped a part when they're on their way to the church. I'm sorry. The girl, one of the other witches that's with them, they have this dialogue with Joe, and she's talking about, I'm studying witchcraft and all this stuff. I want to know about powerful spells. And she talks about how, well, when I do my spells, I think about painful memories because that trauma makes the spells more powerful. And then Joe's like, oh, okay. And she goes, well, I'm just studying it. And she's like, you need to be real careful with that. Which is really cool, It's like, stay away from witchcraft kind of thing. Like, you could tell she regrets her decision of becoming a witch, and she's kind of forced to serve the devil now and has all these gifts from the devil, and she hates it. So it wasn't really ultimately worth it, which is really kind of cool. Like, there's different kind of layers. Like, the characters are complex, and each one you can tell has a unique backstory, just with kind of whatever little screen time that they do have. But anyways, there's this kind of gnarly like scene where they get split up and Hellboy fights the girl because she's getting taken over by the devil, right? And there's this gnarly kind of Evil Dead scene where this black snake kind of comes out of her lady parts there and starts wrapping around her and starts going into her mouth and, back in and out. It's just like violation, and it's so disturbing. And then, of course, Hellboy starts fighting the snake and stuff, and it bites him a couple times and starts kicking, his ass. And then finally Hellboy breaks it with his hands, right? And his head explodes. But then the venom causes him to fall down. And then he goes into, like, the dream world. And you see this, like, cathedral that's obviously been blasphemed so the devil can have it. And he walks in. And they keep talking about how, like, the devil can't go into a church, And, Hellboy's like, well, I'm not really the devil. So they kind of have that segue. So he's able to walk into the church and, it's unconsecrated anyways. And he sees his mother. And she's like burning in this ethereal fire. And then the other girl's there with him that just, died or whatever. And she's talking about how, here comes the beast. And here comes Satan. But he's like this giant raven. And it's so metal, man. And this scene... the graphics are pretty good for this scene, honestly. I feel like this is where they really saved it. And it's like this big bird comes, and even Hellboy's like, that's a big bird, So it's kind of got the humor of Hellboy in it still, but it's dark, man. It's like really occult horror, And it's just like the devil talking about, like, your soul belongs to me. And his mom's like, well, just let me go to God. And he's like, no. It's so creepy, man. It's dark. And then it shows her burning, and it kind of goes into her, like, womb, and you see baby Hellboy. And then the chick behind him actually turns into the Crooked Man. He, like, does his neck thing. So you're like, it really wasn't her. It was the Crooked Man. So it's like the Crooked Man messing with him, bringing him to see the devil and his mom and to torment Hellboy in the spiritual dream world. So that was cool. And, of course, he wakes up. Then they go to the church. So my bad. I forgot that. That's a big part. And so it alludes to the girl that just died from the snake. Her soul's up with God now and with Jesus. And that's really cool because they really make... the Crooked Man and the devil in this, it's creepy, man. It's a good job. And anyways, lo and behold, he's like, well, we got to wait for, we got a couple of daylight. And then it just becomes dark. And they're like, well, that's not possible. That's not how nature works. And the Reverend's like, well, up here, we're on his time. And here comes all the witches in the coven, coming. And they can't come into the church area because it's consecrated ground. So that was really cool to see that. That's what I'm saying. Most movies, they just, whatever, God doesn't have any power. And they come in and evil's like, so super scary. But in this, It's like, no, God is the ultimate power. Good is the ultimate power, so they can't come in. And so here comes the Crooked Man. And he's coming out too. And so the guy's like, well, you know what? I'm just going to go out here and make a deal with the devil and save all these people because enough people have died. And man, the Crooked Man's got a creepy portrayal. Man, he's gnarly looking, you know. They really kind of captures how he looks in the comic book. And he's like, well, here's the wishbone. I'm going to give it to you. And I want you to, save these people. And the Crooked Man's like, well, he's got that kind of creepy voice. Well, you's the one that put him in harm's way, so why do I got to do it? You got the little coin here, man. The little coin in it there. And he's like, well, okay, we'll take it. And he's about to grab it. And then Hellboy, comes in and is like, no. And Hellboy's like, I don't like it, how much you want this deal. And then he just starts talking about how, man, you are ugly motherfucker. And he goes, I know it's calling the kettle black, but damn, you're ugly or whatever. And so the Crooked Man and Hellboy start talking smack to each other, and it's pretty awesome. And he's like, why don't you turn around? And then the Reverend comes out, and he's like, you get away from here. You're not allowed here. The Lord Jesus rebukes you, And the Crooked Man's all being all creepy and demonic. And so they're able to, leave or whatever. And as he's talking, the witch sees a dead person in the consecrated ground. And she's like, well, how could she be here? She poisoned her husband and murdered him. And then the Crooked Man kind of like, oh, he's a murderer. So they do this thing where, yeah, their souls have been forgiven. And even the priest says this, their sins have been forgiven by God. But Hellboy says, well, their sins are not forgotten. And so it allows the Crooked Man to use his dark magic, his black magic, to bring them back as zombies, right? And he's tearing off the gates, the steel gates or the iron gates, because the devil is not supposed to like iron, and Hellboy's supposed to be the devil. And he uses his witchcraft powers to impale Hellboy with those irons. And he walks into the church, and the Reverend's like, oh dear. And they're like, oh, Hellboy's dead. And he's like, oh, I ain't finished. And he's ripping him out. And you could tell it kind of weakens him. And then the Crooked Man's putting his hands in the soil and causing all these people to come back from life. And then we get this awesome action scene where it's kind of like, Night of the Living Dead. All the zombies are coming into the church and Hellboy's shooting them one by one. They have this little dialogue right before all this happens where the priest is praying or whatever. And Hellboy's doing his gun and lighting it. And he's like, you doubt the power of prayer? And Hellboy's like, no, I just like to have this on hand just in case. It's so cool. Which I was glad to see that they show that Hellboy does pray. In the Del Toro, he's got a rosary. And in the comics, he does, it alludes that he prays the rosary and does believe in God. So that's kind of cool that they kept that in this. And so as the zombies are starting to come in and everything, and Hellboy's shooting them all, and the dude's dad comes back to life, and he has to get him out. And Hellboy kicks his ass, The Reverend, this is my favorite part. He's like, I'm all fired up now. And he grabs his bone and goes, we're going to put the power of the Holy Spirit in this, boy. We're going to cast down Satan out of here, y'all. It's so awesome and hilarious. And he takes the shovel that he used to bury. He goes, every single body has been buried here. And I do it with the power of the Lord. And he puts the cross on it or whatever. And you can see the Holy Spirit comes into the bone and turns this into a sacred relic or whatever. And it's just so awesome, right? And all before this part happens, the Crooked Man's trying to tempt the priest too. So right before he's like, the power of the Lord or whatever, the devil's tempting him. And he's like, well, what if we do a deal, And he's like, no, get out of my head, Satan. Don't tempt me. And he's like, well, what if we gave you 10 more years? Or how about 20 more years? And the Reverend looks 20 years younger. He goes, and how about we fix them eyes while we're at it? So he cures his blindness. And then this girl comes up and starts tempting the Reverend. It's like, I saw your eyes on me, trying to seduce him, trying to make him all horny. And then he's like, I don't want no gifts from the devil. God help me. And then, he finally becomes old and blind again. And then he gets the thing of the power of the Holy Spirit with the shovel. And Hellboy's like, well, that could work. And he gets the shovel and he swings like this. And you just see all of the zombies fall down. Then Hellboy runs out to where the Crooked Man is, goes to hit him. And it's like this A-bomb of the Holy Spirit. And it just boom. And it shoots back all the witches, all the Crooked Man, Hellboy passes out. Then it cuts, and they wake up, and they finally go to where the Crooked Man is, and you can tell he's like, depowered. And they're like, well, we should just leave. He's like, no. He's like, depowered. We got to go finish him off. Joe realizes that underneath, from the tidbit earlier, about how the mines are like the veins and the soil's evil. So they're alluding to like this whole land's curse. So if they go in there and bless it or do a spell, they could fully weaken the Crooked Man. And the blind man's like, girl, are you out your motherfucking mind? Like, you want to go practice witchcraft after all this? It's so funny. And it turns out that the church was built on a sacred entranceway into it to contain all the evil. And the priest wants to go, and she's like, well, I don't know. He goes, well, girl, I'm no more blind up here than I am down there. And so they're going, and when they go down there, they see this evil spider again, and she ends up doing her witchcraft spell. The priest sacrifices himself to save her from like the Crooked Man's spells, and the ravens come and pluck out his eyes and pluck out his tongue. It's really gruesome, and it's a really upsetting moment because they kill like the best character. The Reverend is so awesome in it. And so that's sad. And so as she's doing her spell, it like breaks what's going on, the spells that Hellboy and the other dude are fighting. Because when they're in the Crooked Man's house, he's like almost tricks Hellboy into shooting himself because he's about to shoot his mom. And the mom is like, oh, I don't like you, And then the other guy's having to fight the witch chick who's always been trying to seduce him and like alluding to like, they slept together. She's trying to use her feminine wiles. But he's still got that wishbone with the power of the Spirit of God in it. And he uses it and blasts her out. And then finally, with that spell being broken, Hellboy is able to face off with the Crooked Man and kind of bitch slaps him around and stuff. And then the other guy, he's, of course, the Crooked Man's like, overturns Hellboy and he's about to hurt Hellboy. And then here he comes with the witch's ball and throws it in the Crooked Man's mouth and completely depowers him. And then he's like walking down the stairs and they follow him, and then Hellboy blows his brains out. And what's cool is when he dies, it's like all the souls that he's taken are the coins, right? And it's like coins are everywhere. Then Hellboy sees one of the pennies, and one of the pennies is pure. Like it's like a brand new penny. It's shiny, where the rest are all dirty and nasty. And so it's like this cool thing where like this guy's soul was always pure, but he messed around with stuff that he shouldn't have when he was younger. So it's like really kind of cool. And Hellboy's like, well, I guess you won't know until you die if you're going to heaven to be with God, or you're going to go to hell to be with the devil. And it's just a fun little nod. And the girl, they go back to the church, and you find out like it looks like she's dead, but she's not. And Hellboy's just like, I can't believe it. And she's like, oh, by the way, look, I got the original package, because when she broke that witchcraft spell in the tunnel, the giant spider was there. And it depowered him, and he shrunk to a little bitty spider again. She was able to put him in a glass jar. So not only did they save the day and defeat this ancient evil, basically going toe-to-toe with Satan himself through his avatar, the Crooked Man, they get their package back, and they're finally going on to the road, and they call, and they're on the chopper, and they're going back, and it basically, is over. It's a good movie. Cool little things just to tidbit on it. There's a really cool reference to Lovecraft himself. You can't really talk about Hellboy without talking about Lovecraft. I mean, the first comic book you open, and Mike Mignola has drawn a picture of H.P. Lovecraft, and in honor of Lovecraft. So Hellboy's always been like a Lovecraftian comic. And so there's a part where they're going to the Crooked Man, and they're talking about how the land's all evil or whatever, and Hellboy literally names drops Lovecraft. Says, I think it's kind of like where the other world and our world meet, to the access to the other gods, like Lovecraft stuff. And the guy's like, well, I don't know much about that, but you might be right. So that was kind of cool. And then I'm sure Mr. Presley, who has arrogantly reviewed my own reviews, but I still love him, and, he's always going to be here on the channel, seeing as how he's a good friend of mine, him and Jerry. There's a reference to Mr. Presley himself in the film, talking about how Elvis's ass doesn't shake as much as this or whatever. So I'm sure if Elvis ever watches this movie, he's going to have quite a bit to say about all this, especially if he reviews this review and watches the film and maybe do his own review. We will see. I'll talk to him about it. I'm sure if I give him enough Pepsi, he'll come out here and do anything I ask. But anyways, In conclusion, it's a great time. You won't regret watching it. Now, obviously, if you don't like Hellboy, it goes without saying you're not going to like this film. But if you like witchcraft movies, you might, because it's a cool, fun time. You know, this would be a perfect movie to put on Halloween or on October or anything like that. Like, you won't regret it. It's just a cool time, and it's like it's kind of refreshing to be like, oh, finally a good Hellboy film again. You know, especially after that last one. So, anyways, like I said, I give it a low 7 out of 10. Normally, like I said, it'd just be a 6 out of 10. But because of its love for the characters and just the overall genre, and all the cool little callbacks to like Hammer and all those kind of creepy witchcraft movies, yeah, I'd just say I'd give it a low 7 out of 10. Check it out. You won't regret it, and I hope you do enjoy it. So let me know down in the comments section if you did like it or if you didn't like it, and why didn't you like it or why did you like it. Anyways, I hope you check it out, and thanks for visiting the Lagoon. Until next time, stay spooky and stay salty. Peace!